the topic of the talk is how do you use the market? How do you leverage on the market to actually be a successful product thinker and take the vision of your product forward? So I'm from a company called ExcelSoft, and ExcelSoft is an edtech company headquartered at Mysore. We are in the business of blending technology and learning pedagogy in the right proportions to deliver solutions to our customers. And we target various segments looking at publishers, higher education, colleges and universities, schools and so on. So what we did in about early 2013, we realized that the education industry, which actually usually lags behind the rest of the industries, did not have enough adoption in terms of big data, business intelligence, reporting, analytics, predictions, recommendation engines. These technologies or techniques were pretty much non-existent in the education domain. And being a product and technology and services company in the education domain, we felt that that is an area which had potential. If applied in the right manner to the education industry, we will be able to deliver, create a product, first envision it and all the way deliver it to the market in order to make an impact. And at that point, honestly, we had no clue. We just felt that learning analytics or business intelligence in education held some potential. So how did we go about creating a product, envisioning a product, and then taking it to that market? When we started off, we were sitting here in India, and the market that we wanted to target was the North American education market, targeting specifically US higher education and publishing segments. Now, being here in India, we did not know enough about that market. We did not have feet on the ground. We did not know what exactly colleges need. We did not know what exactly publishers need in terms of their learning analytics or in terms of the predictive needs that they have. So we started our research. That obviously is the first step when you try to envision a product. And through primary, secondary research, reading through reports, we identified that there is a clear, deep trouble in the US higher education industry. And that statistic there is very telling. 40% of the students who enroll into college never graduate out of college. They do not go out with a degree. So you can see a similar problem happening in India with the recent government's initiatives around Skills India, which focuses on making graduates employable. The US education sector is also facing a similar problem. And we felt that that needed to be addressed. Now, how do we go about doing it? We had a footprint in the US market through certain customers that we had, especially in the publishing sector. ExcelSoft already had products in the test and assessment space, which is a specific area within the education domain. Bear with me if I speak too much about the education domain, but I'm trying to bring in the context which will make it easier for us to understand the case study and how we leveraged on the market and how we went about creating this product, a new product altogether. So having that sort of a footprint with the publishers in the US education industry, we were able to reach out to the market. We had the opportunity to speak with potential customers. We had the opportunity to sell an idea to them. So what we did was to identify what the challenges were and whether there is an opportunity for us in that market. That comes down to the very first triangle that Dinkar showed earlier in his presentation, the opportunity, identifying it, and then creating a strategy. So that's the very first step, and this is where we do not have a customer. This is where we do not have a customer telling us what they need, but having identified a need as a product company, how do I go about defining that? So uncharted waters, pretty much no player who was targeting that exact same segment. Yes, there were many companies who were doing learning analytics. There were many companies who were targeting business intelligence and reporting in education. There were a few pure play players as well in the market who had specific products targeting a certain need within a college. So for example, an advising or tutor scheduling need, they were targeting that specific need. But no one who was targeting the entire journey of a student's life through college and not trying to address it in a holistic manner. So we felt that it was an early mover's advantage for us, and if we enter the market, time it right and take the product out into the market, we'll be able to capture a significant chunk there. The vision was ambitious. We intended to start with just a very basic problem statement. We just said, let's apply analytics to education. That is pretty much where we started. And then from there, how do you create the entire vision which addresses a specific problem, which you need to identify the problem and then be able to address it. It was a geographically distant market. Being an Indian company, we had very little footprint in the US. And there was a knowledge gap. We did not know, we hardly knew anything about the US higher education industry. We had some knowledge about how it works in India through our own experiences and through other customers that we have in the Indian subcontinent. So what I want to focus on today is to take you through that journey, to take you through that case study of how we started with the product inception, went on to execute it over the course of the next year or so, rolling it out and actually facilitating the adoption of that product into the market, and then what we are doing currently, which is to evolve the product further and then go and push it more aggressively into the market. So in each of these phases, I want to specifically highlight on what the touch points were with the market. What was it that as product thinkers and as product owners, we were trying to leverage the market? What were the different ways in which we leverage the market?
Can we ask questions in between?
Yes, sure, please do.
I have a question. So before you envisioned that you would actually do something for US, did you do something beforehand? You have this product, right? Analytics.
Yeah, so we had business in the publishing segment in United States. We were working with customers like Pearson, Guardian in the UK, and had that experience and that customer base. But we did not have anything specifically for the colleges and universities or the higher education segment. There was no analytics product in place, but we felt that there was a clear need for an analytics-based solution or a product in the market. We are a products and services company, so the default reaction is, oh, let's go and provide our capabilities as services in that market. But then we tend to consolidate. Once we have provided services in a certain area for a while, then we consolidate and create products out of it and then understand the market better to be able to frame the problem statement like you said earlier. So we knew that there is a need. Learning analytics was still picking up, analytics in general was just picking up in 2012, and we said let's try this area, let's understand whether this will work out, whether there is a value. And as we got deeper into it, we realized that we were right about that initial assessment. Now pretty much every industry has certain usage for analytics, business intelligence becoming more and more intelligent, applying deep learning, neural networks, etc., etc. But at that time, 2012, it was just starting off, and that was still an early realization, especially for the education industry, which is at least 10 years behind the other industries. So during the product inception, how do you leverage on the market at the time where you are, the market research is an even earlier part of it, where you start off with the market research, you continue with market research during the course of your product development, product evolution, but at the very beginning, how do you take it to the market? The problem at hand was this. Problem was we did not have a base product to sell in the market. We had capabilities, we had a certain desire to address that particular need in the market. We were sure that there is a need in the market for that kind of a product, but we had no clue what that shape of the product would be. So the first step for us was to try and define that base vision, try and define a base product, at least a core product with which you can get started, you can start talking to a potential customer, and that was the first step essentially. Having worked on BI projects or data mining related projects in the past, we created a generic framework. Around business intelligence. We built several connectors. We, having that experience in the education industry, we knew the typical systems that exist within an educational organization. So typically an educational organization, whether it is a publisher or higher education or a school, would have an LMS, a learning management system. They would typically have a test and assessment management system. They would typically have a student information system or a extension of an ERP which handles that function. So what we did was to create a base product which said that we would integrate with these standard solutions in the market and provide a core analytics platform to our customers. Now that was just an opening for us. That was just an opening line for us to go to a customer, potential customer, and then figure out what else needs to be done, what are the kind of reports they need, what exactly do they want to predict. We had no clue about that. So with that generic framework, with certain custom reports, capabilities to create ad hoc reporting, it was essentially a reporting solution with a little bit of analytics thrown on top of it. So with that base product, it gave us an opening through into that market, and then we identified market friendlies. So customers with whom we had worked on a different area, not specifically analytics or not targeting retention, not targeting student success, but we approached them with that base product. We gave them a sneak peek of that base product. We let them try it out with certain data that they would either send to us, or we would do a lightweight integration, pull that data and show them that if we had more of this, if we had more of this data, this tool could do more for you. So giving those tangible outputs to the customer is important. Identifying those market friendlies at a very early stage is very important. That allows you to validate the product idea, it allows you to go deeper into the product vision, have that conviction that your vision is actually going to work eventually. You're not creating something for a phantom market, you're creating something for a real market. So identifying those market friendlies, what we did essentially was to identify 2 colleges with whom we were able to trial run or start running that analytics platform or that core engine. We also identified one publisher from the education industry who had a sort of larger footprint in that market and a different sort of a data set altogether. And so while identifying these market friendlies, what we were targeting was to understand the real need. What we were targeting was to not sell our core framework. It was not about selling the core framework. It was about evolving that core framework into something which really addresses their need. So the need was identified. By this time, when we started these discussions with market friendlies, we started reading up more, various research avenues, specifications, standard bodies who were all working towards that. The key pain point was this, which is that 40% of the students who join college do not graduate. And they call it a retention problem, where students are joining college but they are dropping out in the second year, dropping out in the third year. Yes, we hear about Bill Gates being a dropout of college and being a successful billionaire, but not every dropout reaches that level. So it is important to have graduates coming out of college, not just from the college's revenue point of view, but even for the industry, even to ensure that you have more employable people in the labor market. So this is still a very pertinent problem in the US education sector, and the US government is also doing a lot more in this area. So the problem had been identified. Then we went on to create a well-defined MVP, and that is, of course, I would be preaching to the choir to say that, but defining that MVP with a very clear set of goals. The first release that goes out, yes, you would iterate on it later on, but the first release that goes out speaks a lot about what the vision is. It should target the real, most impactful part of your vision. That MVP should have something which can deliver tangible value to the business that you're going to.
Sorry, going a point back, what parameters did you use to choose the market friendlies? You said you chose 2 colleges. Did you actually choose amongst a group of options and then, oh, these 2 best fit the scenarios that I want to do? What are those parameters that you use?
Usually in
okay, where I'm coming from is they actually would have turned as your first adoption subset, and then you obviously the first adoption is important. You want to get the real feedback that you want. You want to test the product on the breadth and depth on it. So choosing the market friendlies becomes extremely important. You want the correct feedback coming in at the first go.
Right. So typically you would not have a large pool from which to select. That is the first. Second is you still need those, you need to be able to, the parameter, one of the most important parameters of course is the budgeting. For education, especially in the education industry, things take a long time to move. Your sales cycle, ability to even adopt, even if you're giving it away for free, an educational institution will not adopt a piece of technology or software for a very long time unless they have all the necessary approvals. They're more uptight about it than the financial industry in some ways. So for us in the education industry, it was important that we identify people or colleges who are forward thinkers, whom we can influence, whom we can bounce off our ideas with, and we were lucky to find those two colleges where the CIOs and the vice presidents were forward thinking enough. They were visionaries themselves to be able to accept and absorb what we were trying to communicate to them. So luck in that sense, yes, has to play a part, will play a part, but identifying those targets whom you could influence a bit, as well as who are ready to listen to you are important.
Did they charge you or you charged them?
We did charge them. Eventually we did charge them, and everything in education institutions goes through budgets. So we are a products and services company, like I said, and the services part of the revenue is very dear to us. It's very, very important. And so while we were building the product, the IP and negotiating how we retain the IP and how much of the product contribution comes from us, how much we charge them, it's a different story altogether. But there would be some base product license that we charge. On top of it, we do some customizations, and then so in the initial phases during the product inception, we'll come to that later in the product evolution, where I try to address or speak a bit about how we transition from a collaborative product development into a SaaS offering, where you pull back a little further and you own the product and you drive it. You stop listening to the customer a bit to some extent, as far as it is about driving the roadmap. Sure.
If you go back to the previous slide, please. That map. US.
Yeah.
So we have defined a problem, but why is there a problem?
So there are several reasons, and what we felt was the analytics layer would start uncovering some of it. There's been tons of research in that area. There's been tons of research why students drop out. You divide them by ethnicity, and then you see whether there is a certain ethnic group which has higher dropout rates. There are certain colleges who are targeting specific 4-year degrees, which students never make it to those 4-year degrees, or they're completing these degrees in 6 years instead of 4 years. And there is a need to create graduates who are employable in the kind of jobs that are actually there in the market. So you need people who are skilled. You don't need degree holders, you need people who have those skills essentially. So what happens there, why people drop out, one of the observations or one of the research areas is that even after getting a degree, they are not actually going to get a paying job. So in order to reach that, we have actually tried to address that through our product vision. We are trying to address some of those areas. For example, when we take the student through that preparation or college journey, instead of targeting a 4-year degree, we actually target the competencies. So the product vision needs to evolve, needs to understand the problem to the very depth, and then evolve based on that, change based on that. So we realize that it is not just about making them complete a degree, it is also about making them employable with certain skills and competencies. So the whole product pivots from there and also starts addressing the need for the competency evaluation, competencies assessments, etc.
Yeah, because it's primarily the skill. Because of that, this is going down. The skill, in the sense, the students who are getting skilled, they're not able to utilize those skills when they go to the companies.
Right.
Because of the reason that they're not teaching what is they can apply.
Right. So there is another very relevant.
That's a majority in US. That's a minority in US. Right now it's coming up. Majority and huge problem in India.
Absolutely, and there is actually another very stark, a very important pertinent metric there again, which is that I do not remember the number, but it was a high number. About 35% of the students are not considered employable even after they graduate. So those problems are linked, and it is important to go into that. So it's interesting that we're talking about specifics of what the product itself needs and how that addresses a certain problem in the industry. And it's great to see that you are actually trying to understand why the problem occurred in the first place. And as product thinkers, as BAs, product managers, we need to constantly do that. So the last one, of course, is a no-brainer, where once we have the MVP, we start showing them something visual, and we try to take that feedback from those two friendlies. Now that we have those friendlies, we have a budget coming in from them, we start the cycle. We start a prototyping cycle, but instead of having an internal body which validates whether the product is going in the right direction, here we have a friendly, a market friendly, an actual user who is able to look at the product, who is able to look at those wireframes and give us that feedback. That accelerates how quickly you get to the final version, how quickly you get to the final releasable version of that product to the market. So this is what we came up with, and to start off with, we had only two components here. So I'm not going to go into the details of what each of these components are, but what we are trying to do is to capture the journey of the student through college, starting at the very beginning, where they do not know which college to join, they do not know which major or which degree is most suitable for them, what are their career goals. They're clueless about it. More or less like us, when we graduate out of 12 standards, it is essentially based on what percentage you get in the +2. You either go for an engineering, you go for art, you go for sciences, etc. In the US, it is even more pertinent problem, where they have too many options. They have 2-year degrees, 1-year degrees, 4-year degrees. Within that, they have a lot of variations. You take a minor, you take a major. On top of the computer science degree, you take an associate degree or a minor along with it, a business minor along with it. So they are clueless about that. And then through the college, helping them in getting through those courses which make them suitable for a particular career, for a job. And then towards the end, helping them getting a job. So coming back to the core of the talk is that we started off with a base product which had only these two things. And that too very minimal. We just had a small reporting platform framework and a little bit of analytics thrown on top of it. When we went to the market, because we identified these friendly customers, because we were able to engage with that customer, the vision expanded. When we talked about retention on day one, it was just about providing those reports. It was just about providing certain predictions. For example, in this particular market, a semester is 13 weeks long. And in the first 2 weeks of the semester, if the student is not engaging with the course, then he's very likely to fail the course or drop out of the course. And that is a very key indicator in this market. Now, we were providing that. We were providing that as part of the base product. Or the base vision. But then there are many other aspects of the student's journey which were not captured or which we were not even aware about. And that is where the evolution happened. That is where the vision got polished, because we went to the market with a base product, because we engaged with the customer and got their feedback very early in the cycle. And so luck again has a part to play there, a big part to play there. It is possible that our original vision of the learning analytics could have been completely rejected, and we would not have built all these other components at all. And there were certain companies who focused on just that part and have gone out of business in the last 3 years. So it was important for us to adapt. It was important for us to take that base vision, but then be ready to change the entire picture there.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. One, what was your overall time to market?
So,
yeah, I can have, let me have one more. So, when you said, because this was a North America market and you guys were primarily offshore, so what challenges you had, working from here? obviously studying the market, talking to people over there?
Sure. So I can try to cover both the questions through the next slide, and that is around the project execution. And we started this particular, once we had the deal in place, once we had this particular friendly customer in place, these two colleges, we started the development cycle on a very aggressive pace. What we had to do was to, as part of that same project effort. So what I'm trying to bring out here is that building that product was not an in-house exercise that happened within our premises, within our building, lock in a room and build the product. It had to involve the potential customer, and that will happen very often. Here, especially if it's not a consumer product, in case of a consumer product, we are all consumers. We sometimes try to put ourselves in the shoes of the consumer and then define a product when you're thinking of a new product. But here you have an actual potential customer who is helping you in defining the product. So during that first phase of 5 to 6 months, when we were taking that base product and talking to various customers, potential customers, the overall time to market, once we had these two in place, we defined a 1 year time frame where we would actually release it to their students, the students being the final customers or users of the system. So that was a 1 year time frame. 1 year was quite arbitrary with certain goals that we set for ourselves. It was more of a business timeline. It was more aligned with how students go to college. The fall or September of the year is usually the time of the year when they come back to school, and that's where the load picks up in an educational institution. So it was more based on that rather than date of completion. And then it came down to us defining what would we achieve in that 1 year. What we did to achieve that execution, completion of that first version that released to users was the first one, of course, very important, which is to prioritize. The diagram that I showed here, there were 9 different modules that we were targeting, which address different parts of the student's journey. Now, we had 9 different stakeholders, one for each of those modules. One head or a VP or a director at that college who handled advising services, one who handled tutoring, one who had student performance or roadmap as their goal and their stewardship. So it was an act of balancing between those stakeholders. It was about building those alliances with those stakeholders. During the execution, that becomes very, very important. Building alliances with all your stakeholders, being able to understand their pulse, being able to understand their eventual goals and their mandates and where they are headed. Aligning yourself to their vision essentially is very, very key there. We released frequently. Now that's a tenet for every modern developer. But we actually stuck to it. We had releases going out to our end users. So let me step back actually. What we did with those 9 stakeholders is to request each of them to provide us with a beta testing group. And that was the group of users to whom we would release every 2 weeks. Once we had the initial sort of 2 months of preparation time, after that we made it release every 2 weeks like clockwork. That release helped us, that 2 weekly sprintly release allowed us to refine the vision, talk to the stakeholder, get their inputs and incorporate it back into the product cycle very, very quickly. And that during that entire 1 year, 2 months of initial preparation and then another 10 months of continuous releases, we pretty much polished each module, building features on top of each of those modules, interacting with those stakeholders, in order to get their vision and releasing to beta users in order to get their inputs. So that became the key. Prioritization of course means that at that point in time we were still working against time. We were running out of time very quickly. The stakeholders had changing expectations and visions. They had urgent. They were creating the urgency to release. They were getting impatient, and it is hard from an educational institution to pick these key stakeholders and then engage them for such a long period of time. So we had to negotiate, we had to understand their priorities, sometimes let go of a few things in order to engage with them in the most effective way possible. And that comes a trade-off. That is the trade-off between making it feature-rich and time to market. So what we did again was to actually release some of these modules early in the cycle. While the entire 1 year was for the full vision to go out to production, we took certain modules for whom the stakeholders were getting impatient and released them to production within a 4-month time frame. So those were modules. Again, it keeps evolving. Your first version need not be the final version, but for those modules, we were actually able to get real production usage and real production feedback as well. And that was part of the strategy, that was part of the goal. These are the simpler modules, let's release them to production and get actual feedback from a larger student population. So, one very important tenet here, you asked about the offshoring model and how we handle that. So we had a satellite team on site, not very large. It was a group of 3, out of which 2 were business analysts and 1 a pure techie guy. Those 3, along with a project manager, were essentially managing the 9 stakeholders, taking the inputs from them, feeding it, translating it back for the development team to implement. And that satellite team was very, very critical in this case. Having a market, a customer who is far away and then need to implement and still release every 2 weeks requires you to have that team going at full throttle. One big challenge that might be very specific to this industry was that our customers were not very used to an agile life cycle, or a 2-weekly release was too much for them. They wanted us to sign off everything. They wanted us to have a 4-month design and specification cycle in which we give them mock-ups for every single module, every single screen, and then come back, sign off, and then do the development. So there was a big effort from our side, especially those satellite guys, to actually not just communicate around the product, but evangelize the process itself. Evangelize why a 2-week cycle is important. Evangelize why they need to invest, the stakeholders need to invest in looking at the product every 2 weeks and giving that feedback to us. So we might take it naturally that in an agile development life cycle you need to have a product owner, but here the product owner is hesitant, is not very keen on participating in that process. What do you do in that case? So we went through that. We actually invested in formal training, formal agile training for our customers, trained them on why an agile frequent release cycle will help in delivering the product successfully, and ourselves evangelized the need for that cycle. Creating alliances and finding champions, I mentioned that earlier, and that becomes key. While you had 8 or 9 stakeholders, you needed a few who actually align with you and say yes to almost everything that you have to say to them. So we had to identify those champions, those who aligned with that vision first, the vice president level people usually, through whom we went in to get those market friendlies to agree to us. And change is inevitable, which is that starting with just those 2 modules, having expanded to that big vision of 9 modules which will cover engagement and retention and student success, we were constantly changing. Even within those 9 modules, the vision of those modules was continuously changing. Then comes the time where you actually roll it out. And having that product, having done all the hard work for more than a year or so, when you are actually to roll it out to a large student population, 40,000 students, 100,000 students, what do you do? So at that point, you do need to bend down a little. You do need to go the extra mile to make certain things happen. So for example, this system depends on a lot of data which exists in systems at the educational institution, at that organization. And we are sort of downstream in that whole chain in terms of the data flow. So it was important for us to also be able to accommodate issues that exist in that data. A lot of it was around, the challenges were around the data not being clean, student data not being in the right structures. a lot of exceptions in the rules that we created for the system, and so it was important for us to go that extra mile to make our first few customers, our first few installations successful. And that took some extra effort to ensure that the adoption goes smoothly. You actually have 40,000 students online on this system, otherwise your efforts are meaningless. Once we had those students online, we created focus groups, interviews, created beta groups where we used to roll out features incrementally over the next few months in order to polish further and understand the areas in the product that need strengthening. One topic which came up earlier in the discussion today was how do you demonstrate that the system is actually doing what it is intended to do, and that was a layer of monitoring, analytics, and metric creation that we created into the system in order to prove value. So when we talk about retention, I am solving the problem through my solution, through my system, through the product. How do I prove that the retention has actually improved? How do I prove that students are now not dropping out? Or how do I prove that if I predicted that a student is going to drop out or fail, that actually happened, or I actually prevented it? So those metrics, collecting those metrics about your system, having that pulse about your system is very, very important, and you need to put in the analytics in place and monitoring in place to do that. Now we are in the stage of evolution. Just a couple of minutes left in my time there. So just the last slide. We are in a stage where we are evolving the product now. What we have done is to create, now that we have the full product ready with 2 full-fledged customers, with 40,000 students on production online, we are taking it to more colleges and universities. Now, again, the strategy is to identify a club of early adopters, pioneers, forward thinkers who are ready to look at the system. This is again a very contextual problem, might happen more in the education industry, where you need to really create those alliances, keep chasing them for a year before they actually convert into a sale. So we have a club of early adopters with whom we engage every quarter. We share our roadmap with them. They share their pain points. These 2 customers, of course, are the most ahead in that. They are leading the way in explaining to us or giving us inputs around what is working for their students and what is not working for their students. And then the others who have not yet adopted the system, but we engage with them to showcase new features to them and get their early feedback on that. The funnel, I guess we've talked about that in various talks today. Very important to gather all the inputs, synthesize it, and then feed that into the product roadmap. One thing which Saurabh mentioned earlier in the group discussion there was we are moving into a SAS model. Now that we have 2 customers, now that we have given the product a shape, we have a clear vision of where we are going, we know the problem that we are solving, we intend to move to a services, software as a service model. And for that the product management needs to be strong. The product management needs to be able to control and channel the right features into the product at the right time, addressing a large part of the market. When that happens, your customers will, you need to ensure that your customers get what they need, not always what they want. And that is a very key important criteria there when you are sifting through a long product backlog and identifying what needs to be done for a SaaS product especially. So key takeaways: listen to the market, create processes to funnel inputs from the market, visualize and into tangible output as much as possible and give it back to the customer, and then release frequently to the market as often as you can. Thank you so much for your time.